on navigating the new world of work in light of COVID-19. Many of us have been working from home or remotely. Some of us are starting to come back. Some of us are continuing to work remotely. So we have a lot of questions on how do we keep our teams together? What do we have to think about as we start going back to work? How do we hire in a time like this? So we're delighted to have our experts from Elite Personnel with us this afternoon to give us a blueprint for success. So just a couple of housekeeping things. As I said in the chat, we're going to keep all the participants muted from the beginning. If you have a question, please put it into the chat. If you don't know how to find the chat, it's at the bottom and it'll say chat, and just click on that and you can type your question in, and I'll be monitoring that throughout the course of the presentation, and we'll pose the questions both during and after the presentation from our experts. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Elise. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to give you a brief overview as to how we got where we are. Obviously, you can imagine that Elite Personnel had pretty much no revenue starting in about the middle of March. And so we figured we better do something to add some streams of revenue, and we might as well spend our time finding out things that would be very helpful for our clients to get through this really difficult time. Excuse me, sorry. So basically, we've all set about reading hundreds of articles, numerous webinars. I can't explain to you how many piles of paper there are stacked all over my condo here. And with the goal of putting together PowerPoint presentations, and this webinar distilling down all that information to some usable bites for small to mid-sized companies, because not everybody has that kind of time. But some of you, thankfully, your businesses are still operating. So, excuse me. So of course, now is the one time I have a problem with my throat. We're going to discuss a bunch of topics today. They're all interrelated, so it's a little hard to sort of separate them out. You know, employee engagement, morale, and productivity. Obviously, you don't have productivity without good morale and engagement. Back to work planning. We're not going to speak so much about the physical aspects of returning to the office because there's a lot of information about that, and we're not health experts. I would refer you to the CDC slides, as you know, CDC site as opposed to us, but more about determining who to bring back, how to make sure it's done equitably, you know, those kinds of things. And if we have time, we'll get to recruiting and recruiting new talent in a crisis. There's not a lot of people recruiting new talent at the moment, except for companies in healthcare and other related things, but we can certainly get to that. With that, I'll introduce you to my co-workers. Josie Kaufman. Josie has spent most of her career working for Fortune 500 companies in the technical world, and she works remotely with teams all over the world, so she knows an awful lot about how to keep teams together, productivity, morale, and communication. Communication seems to be the overarching theme of it all. Every single article focuses on communication, so you'll hear that word a lot today. And Jeff Rosolio, who has spent his whole career in HR, culminating in a number of senior VP slots with large companies, some national companies, some government contractors, most recently with a fuel distribution company, which I don't know anything about, but that was really interesting. It's headquartered in Texas, so we actually had to relocate to Texas for a while. But he's worked with diverse teams as well. So I think the idea is that we'll sort of just have kind of a bit of a back and forth conversation, let those two mostly speak because they have much more experience with diverse teams than I do, although I must say everybody at Elite Personnel works remotely now. And we did even in the past. We have somebody in Arizona, we have Virginia, we have Josie in Massachusetts, Jeff and I and Nicole are here in Maryland, and Patrick's in DC. So we're reasonably dispersed in any case. So Josie, I think you were gonna start a little bit with employee morale and engagement and then on to productivity.
Absolutely. So hi, everybody. Welcome. And so let's talk a little bit about how to identify when morale starts to go south. There are so many different factors that are adding to this today. Never mind working remotely, being in isolation, not used to being able to reach out to your colleagues, and so on. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard about it. But there is one thing. Remember the saying, silence is golden? Well, in this case, that is not so. When a person starts communicating less and sharing less information with their colleagues, it's a telltale sign that something is up. Similarly, you can always tell when productivity is going down, or the quality of work, or negative comments tend to come out about a project that they're working on, or the company messaging, or whatever. It's just a subtle a subtle sign, but you should really take note and get into a conversation and see what's going on with that person. You might be surprised to find, that it could be a simple fix. So how do you motivate people? How do you manage to motivate? I mean, that is so key, right? The saying, or we're all reading about, we are all in this together. It has a completely different meaning today than it did 4 months ago. We are in this together. It doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter what you do. We are all in the same boat. So being human is really important. You know what you go through working from home when you're not used to it and you've had an office and coming in and going out. Now people are being faced with children at home because their schooling the past few months has been at home. Spouses are working at home, or partners are working it from home with you. It's one thing when you see them 8 hours a day. It's another thing when you see people 24 hours a day. So it can really bring some stress into your life. Also, unfortunately, we've lost some people along the way. Whether, layoffs or furloughs, whatever you might be experiencing, but there's work that needs to be picked up. So picking up that slack can also cause a little angst with people when they have a hard time doing their own job, and also in this new environment. Try to avoid the burnout. If you can, get some help. Get, somebody in to do the tasks that anybody can do, whether it be data entry or answering the phones or something, but take a little bit of what you can off the plate of your team players. Share tips, share tips. Everyone's experiencing different things, but there are certain things that one person might experience that might help another one working from home. One thing that is definitely good for me is identifying a corner of the house that I can work in. And I go there and I go to work. And that's it. Life is turned off. My life is turned off. I'm now at work. I find it very helpful. I can stay focused, and it's good. For me, it's good. Bringing to mind with that, communication. As I said before, people miss that interaction in the office. So how can you increase the communication, or how can communication be so important to one and not so important to another? We're all different, absolutely everyone's different, but it really comes from the top down. Leadership needs to play that role to, number one, advise their employees what's going on with the company, what's the messaging, what are we doing next? How are we going to be accepting people back to work? What is going to be the new norm? And also providing tools to those people who are working remotely, and making sure that they have the technology that they need and access to information to be able to do their job effectively and be productive. One other thing that you could do is schedule video calls. Have one-on-ones with your folks every week. Do a team happy hour. I mean, I'm sure you guys have all been doing some social distancing on Zoom with your friends or even with colleagues to just try and lighten the air a little bit. It helps. And this contact, seeing you guys, seeing some type of, reaction, it's great. It's healthy. We need this. Our little brain needs this. It's all good. And in doing that with your team, you also then build team activity in order to make everyone feel like they're a part of the team, that they're contributing, that they're being acknowledged, that they're being heard. Listen, listen, listen. The feedback that your team can give you on these calls, just little comments that you might pick up on, are so key. And it helps them to feel like they are a part of a team, I guess I could say. That's the simple way to say it. Acknowledge your team members for a good job done. Let them know that you appreciate them. It goes a long way. One idea that I thought of a couple of weeks ago was, what about an award for Employee of the Month or Team Member of the Month? Get a silly donkey statue and have it be rotated, each month to a new employee or whoever goes that extra yard, whoever, might have an extra win or whatever it might be. They would appreciate it. It's fun. It brings camaraderie to the team. It helps for collaboration. Any activity you can do is good activity. So from that perspective, Jeff, with your experience in the workforce and being in HR, you might have some additional information to share on this topic. Jeff, you're on mute, my friend.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I got a message that I got muted, so I won't take that personally. One of the interesting things that you said, and I guess we're all thinking about, is you said we're all in this together. There's actually a little bit of a non sequitur or a paradox there, because we're all separate, right? We're really not together anymore. So being in it together and creating that feeling is really, really important. The other thing is, we all have a tendency to think that people who grouse or people that give us negative feedback or complain are victims of poor morale. And I'm going to be an iconoclast on that and say that isn't necessarily so. It's when your grousers, your iconoclasts, people that are sometimes rowing in the opposite direction, go silent, when you're no longer hearing the complaint or the grousing or the negative comment. That's actually when you know their morale is suffering too. So it's not only the positive stuff that evaporates, it's the negative stuff too. And sometimes I think we can't forget that negative feedback is not always the easiest to offer, but it can actually be as valuable to us as positive feedback is. So when your grumpy people go silent, it's as bad as when your happy, smiley people go silent as well. And you were talking about corporate communication. Obviously, you want there to be a rhythm to it and a pace. We're not with people every day. We can't circulate around the office. Managers and coworkers can't check up on each other and see how they're doing. So the regular checkup and establishing a rhythm with remote workers is really, really important, so that you don't fall out of the habit of communicating with people. And the other thing that I think is important, and there's some overlap, because this is part of some of the things I was going to say when you're managing a dispersed workforce, but it has to do with productivity and morale too. And that is when sometimes people at the office don't get the big picture. They know what's going on at their workstation. They know what's going on with the person next to them. They may know what's going on with their team, but they don't know what's going on with the company. And that's just exacerbated when people are working remotely. So I'm a very strong proponent of, when you have your daily meets or your daily huddles or your regular meetings with people, in addition to covering the responsibilities they have, checking up on what they're getting accomplished, I think it's a great way to start a meeting by giving them a big picture. Tell them what's happening with the company. Tell them if someone got promoted. Talk about a big win or a new customer that you got. Just keep them in the loop with everything that's happening business-wise, with the business development pipeline, and even company metrics on how you're performing financially. When people get the big picture, they feel much more a part of the team. And to the extent that you can, involve company leadership. So most of the people on the call today are from small companies. They don't have a CEO, a president, board, the chairman of the board to parade out, but it's important for people who own the company, the small company. If you're the president or the managing partner, it's really important that you not put all of the communication down on your management team. You need to be part of the management too, because when you're painting the right picture from your perspective, that's infectious, and your employees will appreciate hearing the big picture, and they'll be interested in hearing your perspective on how things are proceeding beyond what their manager's telling them or what their coworkers are telling them. That's it.
Elise, you're on mute.
Unmute. Sorry. I was making jokes and saying, okay, webinar over. You can all have lunch now. Well, I think there's, Jeff was going to talk a little bit about managing a diverse workforce, but we're also returning to the office and how does a company decide who to return to the office and how to do that equitably among a large number of generations in the workforce now and people that have, higher and lower risk, et cetera. So Jeff, can you talk a little bit about that?
Funny you should ask. I'm all ready to do that. So aside from the comment we're tackling, but it's really important to make sure that you have a very robust technological infrastructure. Your people have to have good computers and good peripherals. You have to have dependable networks and good communication. And you need to have access to files and data that are somewhere either in the cloud or on a server with your company. And I know that seems very, very basic, but it's much more important when you're working with a dispersed workforce to make sure that all those things are up and running efficiently and well. I was actually talking about this a little earlier today with Elise, and she made a very good point, and that is that you may not always know when your employees need a new computer, a new peripheral, a new printer, or some sort of help, because they may be a little reluctant to raise that issue with you, figuring that the company may be struggling a little bit financially, and they're a little, they're a little slow to ask for any type of support that may cost money. So sometimes you may need to do an occasional checkup with your employees to see if everything is running right for them. Make sure that their infrastructure, that they have access to everything, and that they have the right to ask. You need to take the initiative on that and step up and do it. So there's the need for technology infrastructure. The other thing is it's a different mindset. I think when you have a lot of people that are working away from the oriented than activity oriented. So you're going to start to focus on results and deliverables. Now with non-exempt employees, that's a little harder. We know that they're supposed to be putting in 40 hours a week. So the way you would deliver the flexibility and the results with your non-exempt employees is not to insist that they're necessarily at their desk from 9 to 5. Since they're working remotely and they have other challenges at home, school-age children, an elderly parent, or just household stuff that needs to get done while they're there. Don't be so worried about them working that 9 to 5 or whatever your regular hours are. Make sure they get in the requisite number of hours during a pay period, and don't worry so much about punching that clock on a regular basis. Now, for your exempt employees, I think it's important to move away from tracking every hour that they work, and maybe even worrying about how much time they're putting in. I've always been a very strong proponent, even before all this started and before we were working remotely to this extent, to really being results oriented and saying, if I give you a deliverable and I give you a deadline, if that deliverable ends up close of business on my desk on Friday and it's done well, it answers the mail, it's what the you expect it's what the customer expects. Don't worry about all that. But again, if the job's getting done, I think that's what we all need to focus on. And, with remote working, a lot of bosses and managers started to worry that they couldn't keep a close eye on their employees. And quite frankly, if they're getting the job done, that close eye really isn't all that necessary. So I think the big word that comes in here, in addition to results oriented, is trust. You have to trust that your people are working hard, that they're making a contribution to your completing your business plan and getting things done. And don't worry so much about the old office parameters of hours worked, schedule, and all that. It's all getting a lot looser. But if the job's getting done, that's what you need to honor and respect and get value from. So trust and flexibility are both very, very important. Another area which suffers when employees are working remotely, and sometimes when we're going through financial hard times, is one of the first areas that gets cut when we're working on our budgets is training. Everybody always chops the training budget first. Let me tell you a little something that applied again before the virus started, but I think it's getting maybe a little more amplified now. There used to be an exchange in the workplace, and that exchange in the workplace was, we're going to give you a job and job security, and in exchange for that, we're going to expect employee loyalty. Well, we both know that job security and employee loyalty went out the window a long time ago. We all have employment at will doctrines, and employees no longer work the same place for 15 or 20 years. So the new exchange that exists in the workplace, the one that replaces job security and employee loyalty, is for your employees to make a contribution to realizing your business plan and attaining what your bottom line needs to look like. What they want in return is career and professional development. They want to develop skills because that's what they're going to take with them to their next job. So while they're with you, if they're contributing to your business plan, that's great for you, but they also want to feel like they're getting something in the equation. And if it's not job security, it is development, tools that they can take with them wherever they go, or use to get promoted wherever they currently are. So in that regard, there are a lot of ways that you can still have your employees trained. You can do company webinars, you can do internal training and do video teleconferencing. You can purchase employee-based computer-based training where they can go online and take courses or seminars asynchronously, not necessarily any specific time of the day. And also you can support your employees attending remote universities, which are popping up all over the place. There was a time when remote universities really didn't have a lot of value. They weren't accredited and they weren't very highly regarded. But today they are. And so supporting university training and technical training and remote or in-person symposia are all ways that you can invest in your people. They'll develop for you, they'll make a better contribution to your company, and they'll feel better about themselves, and you'll garner either employee loyalty in a different respect, or at least you'll keep your employees invigorated and feeling like they're getting something beyond the usual salary and perks. So training, really important, don't forget about it. And then the last few remarks I'd like to make is when you're managing a dispersed workforce, you need to provide clear and concise direction. There can't be any ambiguity because you can't run around the office and fix things on the fly. So the better you're communicating with people and the better they understand what you want, the better you're going to get things accomplished with your remote employees. Be flexible, be trusting, as I said before. You need to allow probably for more autonomy and more empowerment because they're at home. You can't micromanage them. You can't keep a watchful eye on them. You can't look over their shoulder. You can't grab their mouse from them and say, no, this is the way you do it. You got to trust, and therefore you have to give them some autonomy and power. But understand that that still needs to be accompanied by good company guidelines and guidance. So create an effective communication feedback loop too. Communication's a two-way street. Keep it going both ways. Encourage your employees to get in touch with you, and you need to take the initiative too. You can't be reactive with remote employees. You really do need to be proactive, take initiative, and reach out to them to keep them in the fold. And the other thing is to regularly reinforce the mission and vision and values of your company. That can be a great cement, a great mortar to put between the bricks of all the moving parts of your company to hold it together. And if you have a mission, don't make it a 3-page treatise. A mission should be easily understood. It should capture in just a few words what your company is all about. And it should be on the tips of the tongues and in the front of brains of all your employees. So if you were to give them a call and say, hey, what's our corporate mission? They ought to be able to recite it to you right away. They shouldn't have to go through memorizing a long document. So again, mission, vision, values, how your company operates, what you value in your employee and your interactions with customers, and your vision for the future are all great ways to keep your dispersed workforce engaged.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Jeff. There's so much information to be had on these subjects between productivity, teamwork, dispersion, remote work, leadership, communication, that we put together. I don't know if I mentioned in the beginning, but we did put together several PowerPoints that are by subject matter that we're more than happy to send everybody, which has really sort of what we've said here, but in more detail, more specific ideas. That being the idea that people can sort of hear what we're thinking are the issues that are going to come up in working in a dispersed workforce, coming back to the office, not coming back to the office, all those issues that I think people are probably discovering are going to happen, employee engagement, employee morale, corporate culture. So if you're interested in any of the PowerPoints, just send us an email to info@elitepersonnel.com, and we'd be happy to send them to you and talk to you if there's anything we can do to help you. One of the things I just wanted to point out before I leave, before I stop talking, is some of the things I've read, which I think are fascinating, and productivity, and why some people are finding it better to work at home. For example, apparently when you're interrupted and you're focused on something and you're interrupted, it takes, I don't know how anybody figured this out, but apparently they did, 23 minutes and 6 seconds to get refocused. So when you think about the office and how many times a day you interrupt your people or they interrupt you, that's an enormous amount of wasted time. I discovered that personally because my number one person, Nicole, has been working at home for a number of years now. And the reason is because I interrupted her so much in the office that she didn't get as much done. And now we discovered she gets an awful lot more done without me. We're standing over top of her. So that works out really, really well. But that's a really interesting statistic. And I know it's true for me is, when you're trying to be focused and something happens. The other thing that people recommended in the productivity part, which I thought were pretty just simple tips. One is that the average email in America is answered within 6 seconds, which just seems bizarre. And all the productivity experts are now saying, turn off your email, literally turn off your email when you're trying to work on something. Go in and check it at a regular interval, whether it's a half hour, an hour, 2 hours, whatever some companies are much more email focused than others, but really turn off the email so you can focus on doing your job. I know I get caught up in my email all the time. It makes me very non-productive. So I know that that's true. The average knowledge worker actually gets 30 minutes of dedicated time a day to work because of all the distractions, in the workplace, in the email, and et cetera. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting things that are going to come out of us working at home. Some of them good, some of them bad. You know, the bad ones being that we're sitting a lot more, at least I am. My condo isn't that big. And so I don't, have to walk 100 feet to the bathroom several times a day. So I'm basically sitting a lot. So that's not a good thing. So I think everybody's really advocating for people to get outside, take time off. It just occurred to me yesterday. I sent an email around to my staff saying, by the way, we haven't discussed taking time off, because it seems kind of like a weird thing, taking time off when you're already, like, you're at home and you're working, but it doesn't seem the same. So I think encouraging people to set up their summer plans and taking time off on a regular basis is really important. So again, if you'd like the PowerPoints, we'd be happy to send them to you. You can send an email to info@elitepersonnel.com. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, we'll stop talking.
If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to pose the questions. But I have one in terms of hiring, and because I have talked to some companies who are needing to hire people back. Some of the folks that were working for them have changed their minds and don't want to come back, and now they're looking at replacing those with other employees. And what kind of advice do you have for trying to navigate that all as we're navigating it right now, as an in-person job maybe in the future, or right now to hire someone just to be a remote worker, but the fact that might change?
Well, I think it's really important that you point out right up front that the job will most likely be in the office, because there's now people that are only going to work from home. Let's face it, there's just going to be people that are angry about going back to the office. So if you're interviewing a new candidate, certainly right up front, this will be, 82% in the office or whatever. Even if it turns out to be more remote, you need to make sure they feel comfortable. A lot of people are doing video interviews, and we've always done in-person interviews. We've done some video interviews and then an in-person, but we've had to learn a lot about how to do video interviews. And so I've got a couple of tips if that would be helpful. And we also do have a PowerPoint on that. But basically, the same things apply. If you're interviewing somebody and they come in wearing kind of slouchy clothes and flip-flops, I usually send them home, because they're usually 22-year-olds. I send them home and tell them to get some real shoes and come back when they're ready to interview. But that's a whole nother question. Seriously, I do that. But you really want to look for the same things. Were they smart enough to get dressed properly? Are they groomed as though they're going in for a professional interview? Are they smart enough to have moved the painting off the wall behind me and have a nice spot? Were they smart enough to put, as Josie mentioned, put the dog in the closet, which makes me laugh. So the dog isn't running through the interview. Those kind of things. Were they smart enough to figure out they needed to they needed to charge their cell phones? There's all this kind of stuff that hasn't changed just because it's video. It's a little harder on a video to get whether the person is full of it or not, excuse my French there, but you really do, but you still have to ask the same behavioral questions. When they're talking in sort of vague terms about all these grandiose things they did, you still need to drill down and get the right answers. Just because they're on video doesn't mean that has changed. And people tend to do lighter interviews on video. So it's important to keep in mind that this person is going to come work for you. If you hire them, they're going to come work for you. It's still the same thing. So, so I think, I think it's, as I said, I have a PowerPoint to put together. I could read all this to you, but I think those are sort of the general drifts. And, it's really hard to assess soft skills. I think that's something that people don't do in interviews very well. I personally am terrible at it, but I don't interview people. Nicole is a genius at it, which is why Nicole interviews people instead. So I don't know, Jeff, if you wanted to add a couple of things, just a brief thing about assessing soft skills, because they're going to be more important than ever. Young people coming into the workforce all have good computer skills. We can stop worrying about Microsoft Word and Excel. Really, they can learn it in about 2.5 seconds, as far as I can tell. It's really the soft skills that are important. So if you have a moment, Jeff, you can address those. You're better at this than I am, frankly. You're on mute.
Yeah, there we go. I got muted again. Maybe I'm talking too much. I don't know. In any case, obviously one of the things that we do in interviews is we take a look at body language, and we take a look at how the person is behaving with all of their nonverbal cues. It's a little harder, but it can be done in a video teleconference. You can tell if the person is slouching or sitting up straight and paying attention. You can tell whether you're getting eye contact or whether they're looking around the room. You can tell how engaged they are by whether or not they're smiling or whether their eyes are wandering. You can ask open-ended questions, which are really important. We all know to do that, but it's even more important in a remote way, because the more a person talks, the more we learn about them. I've always said that Mother Nature gave us one mouth and two ears for a reason. And so listening is a very, very important skill in interviewing, but we're picking up a lot of other cues in person. You can't pick them up, all of them, when you're doing a video interview. So you need to be a very, very good listener and seeing what those, the answers to those open-ended questions, which are going to give them plenty of time to talk about, and you're going to keep your mouth a little bit shutter and and listen to what they have to say. So I think that those are really the important things. And again, I know that in Elise's experience, she's seen people show up for a video interview, and just because they're on camera, they're wearing a stretched out t-shirt. And we've also seen people that have put on a suit and tie, knowing how important it is, regardless of where they are, to get that job. So pick up on all the cues you can in the frame that's in that video. Listen, 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 and ask questions that elicit responses that will give you some insight, not only into the person's knowledge, but also their thought processes and how articulate they are at communicating with you.
Great. All right, thank you. Josie, do you have any last words before we let these good folks get back to their businesses?
No, actually, I think I'm good. I am done. I am done, as Jeff said. I'm finished.
All right.
I actually do have one other question that came through.
Sorry.
And I don't know, in the reading that you've done, and this is a little bit going to depend on, you know, what kind of orders we get from the county and whatever. But the question is, what are you hearing about how people are managing when their folks come back to work? Are they allowing people to continue to work from home? Are they talking about that? If their people are uncomfortable coming back to work, are they requiring certain numbers of people to come home? And then in the office, how have you read that people are starting to manage that, or what kind of advice have you gotten from all the reading that you've done in terms of managing who comes back and when and how all that works?
Well, it's still actually really very confused. You know, it's only, you know, people are, you know, wondering, can I force somebody to come back to work? People are wondering if people had some inherent right, you know, to work from home now. I listened this morning to Mark Engel, who's from Lurch Early, a wonderful member of the Silver Spring Chamber, did a little presentation for the Women Presidents Organization that I'm a member of this morning on the legal issues. And the one thing he pointed out right away was, no, people do not have, people are not entitled to work remotely. So that is a problem. It is and it isn't. The interesting thing is that the generations don't make sense. The millennials want to go back to work. You would think it would be the opposite. You would really think that the opposite would be true. That the millennials would want to, are so savvy and so technically oriented that they could work from anywhere, and they can, of course. But they really are a social generation, so they want to come back to work. So it's interesting. We outline a lot of this in a couple of the different PowerPoints, but basically, Jane, to tell you the truth, most of our clients have decided they're not coming back to work until the end of the summer. So that's what we've heard from almost every client we have. So I don't know whether that's what you're hearing from the members or not. And I don't know if that addressed the question, but Jeff, if you have something you wanted to add in.
So we're in a murky area because we're all learning on the fly about this, because we've never encountered it before. I've got 6 points that I would like to go over, maybe hopefully for the benefit of everybody listening. These are not hard and fast rules. I'll call them guidelines, not rules. And things to consider when you're letting people, deciding who comes back to work and who doesn't. The first thing I'd like to say is overarching, and that is, we all have a tendency to think that everyone needs to be treated equally. And some of us have had that drummed into our heads for many, many years. And quite frankly, nothing could be further from the truth, because not all people are equal in their needs and in their challenges and in their skill sets and in the type of work they do. So I prefer to use the word equitable, or maybe the synonym for that is fair. So don't treat everybody alike, because people aren't alike, but they all need to be treated fairly. So with that thought in mind, here's the things that I've sort of jotted down for people to take into consideration. First, you should consider risk factors such as age, health conditions, and family responsibilities. You should look at the job responsibilities and how well the job they're doing lends itself to working in the office or remotely, and make some of your decisions along that line. So, you know, and the other thing you're doing with all of these things is you're keeping this not only oriented towards fairness, but oriented towards the needs of your business. You could take into consideration employees' commute and the impact on productivity. Maybe it doesn't make sense for someone who lives really far from the office to turn up hours in which they could otherwise be productive sitting in traffic. Think about the office space that you have and whether you can satisfy the parameters for distancing. So the other thing we're all going to need to rethink is this whole open office concept, where we had offices where everybody sat together with no barriers, and there weren't even shared workstations. There were hot stations. People would show up with their computer and plug into any port and sit in any seat that was available. Not going to be happening for a while now. Think about your ability to provide a safe and healthy work environment, and when you can take the employee's preference for working in the office or remotely, do so. But as Elise stated, and as Mark Engel said, we do not have a duty to allow people to work from home. We as business owners can make those decisions for them. But if you can in any way accommodate somebody, their needs, their preferences, it certainly only works in everyone's best interest to do so, but not when it's counterproductive to getting business done.
Thank you. We have another question. This is from someone who's hired a new analyst and have assigned a seasoned analyst to help with the onboarding. How often should the mentor be in touch? How often should leadership touch base with them? And can there be too much communication?
Josie, can you take that question? I think that's much more up your alley than mine.
So if it's a new analyst that's coming on and this person is mentoring that person, I would be available for that person all day long. If they have a question, if they have an issue, I want to know, I want to help them to be successful. So as a mentor, you should be available. Leadership, I would say once a month. You know, I don't think that's necessary. I mean, other than the normal corporate or company communication. Welcome them on board. Glad to have you. If you have any issues, please let me know. And, you know, check in maybe once in a while, depending on what the dynamics are of the company. But I would really say that the mentor would want to be involved. You know, I mean, I'm not talking about micromanaging. I'm talking about being available for questions and processes, explaining and training. Jeff, your thoughts?
My thoughts are, part of the question is, can you communicate too much? My answer to that is no. Right. You can't communicate too much. I've told the story to both Josie and to Elise about a CEO I worked for, and he used to tell us, communicate, communicate, communicate. It is the key to everything. And he said it once a year. So we need to do it a little more than that. The other thing is, I think when you're in this mentor-mentee relationship, you ought to let the person who's being taught, the new person, really decide how much communication they want. Let them ask as many questions and communicate as often as they want. So if the mentor notices that there's not enough communication, he or she needs to push that along. But in the early stages, there's no such thing as too many questions or too much communication. I just don't see how anything bad can come out of that. Now, it may impact the mentor's productivity a little bit, but that's going to be a temporary thing. They'll be back to work and be getting a lot less questions and communications down the road. But the way to ensure that that happens is to allow as much as possible up front.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions from the group? If you do, either raise your hand or put them in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them. I'm looking through the group right now. Okay. Well, if not, I want to thank our folks from Elite Personnel for joining us today and give Elise a chance to maybe just say a couple closing comments, but to thank everybody for joining us today. We are Facebook Living this as well, so Julie's been monitoring that as we've gone through the afternoon. So Elise, thank you so much. If you
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to us today. I hope some of the stuff we said was valuable, and please do ask for the PowerPoints. I think they're quite informative. We certainly tried our hardest. So yeah, just send an email to info@elitepersonnel.com and we'll be happy to respond. Probably not this afternoon, but certainly tomorrow. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care.
Okay.